Okay, so this is the second module of the news media section. The very fact that this is split into two modules will tell you something about how important and how complicated the issue is. Once again, we're not going to talk about everything in the book chapter. This is meant to supplement what's in the book because the book can only cover so much, and because we can only cover so much in each module. I hope in this module to provide you with coverage of some of the key concepts in the book, and also some new concepts and access to numerous clips to help illustrate points. Also, once again, it bears mentioning that this is probably one of the most political topics we will discuss, although in the next section we'll be talking about textbooks, which will have some political elements as well. My goal here is not to instill any new worldviews into anybody. We are not trying to examine if the so-called left or so-called right is actually right or usually wrong in terms of moral values or economic analysis or anything else. This is a course in critical thinking. What we're trying to evaluate, among other things, in this section is the levels of bias in the news media itself. We need to try to do this objectively because regardless of what our own personal views are, we risk fooling ourselves into thinking we have good information when we do not otherwise. It would be nice to think that an objective examination would mean that we would say that the news is exactly objective, that it isn't biased in one way or another. But as we saw last time, the news is a business. It has interest. It is also influenced by powerful interests that control its purse strings. There are other sources of bias as well, which we will discuss in this module. The upshot is that some views, the views that favor the wealthy and powerful, no real surprise when you think about it, since they are the ones who actually own the television stations, the presses, and have the disposable income the advertisers want access to, are the views that are favored and catered to by the media. A short recap. Last time we saw that ownership was a corrupting influence on the media, that is corrupting if what you value is objectivity. This can be ownership of the media itself, ownership of the parent companies of the media, ownership of the children companies of the media, and it can also be advertisers that finance the media. Advertising is one of the most powerful influences on the media. It can lead to, for example, things like native advertising, which, as we saw last time, can be especially pernicious. People often think that they're getting news or objective reports when they're actually receiving sponsored content. The media is going to tend to be pro-authority and pro-business, and it's going to tend to be anti-labor. To make matters worse, the diversity of news sources has been drastically reduced in the U.S., with fewer and fewer megacorporations owning more and more media outlets. Oftentimes, it may look as if multiple different sources share the same opinion independently, but they really have the same owners. Okay, so much for review. Spin is a form of propaganda that uses various methods of persuasion, such as the forms of bias we've been discussing, to shape views. There are numerous of other types of bias and spin mentioned here and in the book. Rather than dryly give definitions of them all, there's a fine glossary in the book for that, I'm going to provide video links in which you can find examples of spin and other types of bias. So both in the last presentation and throughout this one, we'll be seeing examples of spin. This time we'll be talking a little bit about bias by omission, bias by placement, bias by story selection, bias by labeling, bias sources, which we've talked a little bit about already, bias of laziness, bias of fear, and bias of presenting both sides or attempting to appear balanced. Bias of omission, sometimes called gatekeeping, occurs when the media exercises one of its most powerful abilities, simply ignoring a story. If a story has implications that they don't like, they can simply not report on it. Then there's no need to spin it, label it, or try to turn it towards their own interests. Bias of placement is similar. If a story seems like it might be too important to be buried entirely, and their outlet doesn't want to be accused of not covering the story at all, they can simply put it at the very back page, or give it very few column inches, or do both. On TV, they might give it a 5-second comment, no pictures, or maybe even just put it at the scroll at the bottom of the screen. This allows the media company to deny that they refuse to cover the story at all, and still gives them nearly all of the benefits of not having covered the story. Every year Project Censored gathers up the top unreported stories of the year. It's hard to get these stories. As mentioned, over 90% of our news comes from 5 mega corporations. To get these stories, they have to dig through back pages, go to independent journalists, get papers from outside the country. Often some of the most accurate news about the U.S. comes from outside the country. That alone should say something about the state of our presses. And fact-check and confirm these stories. They use scholars at major institutions to check them for accuracy and rank them in terms of levels of importance. Please view the following video. These are the top buried stories from 2013 according to Project Censored. You can also follow the additional link to see more stories that are currently being underreported in 2014. I'm not going to just read all the headlines aloud. After viewing these, I think you'll agree that these are all incredibly important stories, and I think that even if you watch and read mainstream news religiously, you have heard or received very little information about many of these top 15 stories. Additionally, one of the major issues that keeps coming up in this video was the role that whistleblowers play in getting this information out into the public. What do you think of whistleblowers? What do you think about the fact that people like Chelsea Manning are facing up to 35 years in prison for reporting illegal activities in the U.S.? What do you think about the Edward Snowden case? Do you think that we should have more laws in place to protect whistleblowers, or do you think that we should take whistleblowers more seriously in terms of prosecuting them? I'll count down from 5 so that you can pause the video and watch it. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Bias by story selection is a little different than deciding not to cover a story. One can be biased by selecting pieces that just seem to show one perspective. If you only show stories about companies giving money to parks or helping with cleanup efforts and deliberately exclude stories, even when they're available, of those same companies being responsible for high levels of pollution, breaking environmental laws, and lobbying against environmental responsibility, then it isn't just the stories that you're not reporting that is painting a picture. It's also the stories that you are reporting. This can be done with images too. Oftentimes protesters, whether it be for Occupy Wall Street, which did receive some coverage, or anti-war protesters, or anti-nuke protesters, or anti-pollution protesters, are simply not covered or undercovered. But when they are finally covered, one tactic is to show those who look like extremists, or to show pictures framed in such a way that it looks like there are fewer of them present, or to show only those who look very angry or uncivil or unclean during the protest. The media does this for a number of reasons. If the protesters are protesting the government, then to retain access and not to get punished by the government, the media tends to promote the government line. The government has ways of punishing those who do not. If the protesters are protesting business, those businesses are likely advertisers or own other businesses that advertise if they're not outright stocks held by the media company itself. Also, the status quo serves the types of people who can afford media companies. Media companies are owned by rich people. Rich people are making money hand over fist from the status quo. Protesters usually want to shake up the status quo. After all, how often do you see people marching up and down with signs saying, "Keep everything the same. Everything's fine"? This is inherently disturbing to anybody who finds the current system lucrative. Source bias. If you're a news outlet, another way to make sure your story has the spin you want it is to select your sources carefully. You may have done this yourself when writing papers in high school or in junior high. Hopefully you start to get over this in college. But maybe you've been told in the past to write a paper defending an issue you care about. In order to defend your position, one thing you might do is only look up sources from groups that defend your position. If you are arguing about abortion, you have a pro-choice view, you might look up a pro-choice advocacy page. If you're arguing for a pro-life position, you might look up information on a pro-life advocacy page. You then look at those sources only. You may go to think tanks that only devote themselves to proving your point of view. These groups are activist groups. They have agendas. Political think tanks do this, and they often give themselves neutral-sounding names, such as so-and-so's for prosperity, or such-and-such is for justice. One libertarian group even goes by the name Reason, and so forth. Of course, if you're interested in real reporting, you don't go to sources that are already cherry-picking their results. You go to experts in their fields. You turn to peer-reviewed journals if you can, and you do the work of trying to sort through this information. You try to look at the diverse range of arguments and data, and you present the information as judiciously as possible. Common bias sources used by the media include business-friendly think tanks, business leaders, official government press releases and prepackaged stories, and company press releases and prepackaged stories. These sources tend to be biased because corporate media does not balance these views, nor do they usually inform the viewer of the biases of the sources may have. Official government press releases and prepackaged corporate stories are not labeled as such. Corporate-sponsored think tanks are portrayed as independent research organizations more often than not. The point is that by picking biased sources, by making it look as if these are the only sources that exist, or like these are the foremost experts, media outlets can bias their output. On this page in the nets are video clips. Please watch these. The first clip is a TED Talk in which the speaker gives some good information about how the perception of U.S. viewers is influenced by the media, how stories are trivialized, and so forth. After watching this, do you think that the speaker's observations ring true? I'll wait for a 5 count before continuing so that you can pause the presentation and play the video. Click back to restart your presentation. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This is another TED Talk. It deals with bad reporting on science specifically, and how the financial interest of large pharmaceutical interests can corrupt findings in media in general and even in good peer-reviewed journals. Such journals cannot report information they are not given by corporations. Well-educated medical professionals are affected. Some of this may really shock you. Some of it really surprised me. The list of points to the right highlights information that you should look for in the talk. Again, I'll delay for a count of 5 before moving on so that you can pause and play the video. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Labeling. The media can label sources, protesters, and so forth in various ways. For example, business-friendly media tends to call heads of corporations CEOs and CFOs, but calls labor union leaders the ominous name of bosses, hinting at power and corruption. Next time you watch the news, look for the subtle use of labels and how they affect perception. Laziness and cheapness. How is laziness and cheapness a bias? Because when a news organization is lazy or cheap, it can also cause bias to a story. It is much easier for a news organization to use government press releases than to investigate the government. It is much easier for a news organization to use a corporate press release than to investigate corporations. It is much easier to take and recycle general news feeds than to dig for new news. It is much easier to take an authority's word on something than to investigate whether or not she or he is telling the truth. When you first started learning to write research papers in junior high or high school, did you ever just take the first sources you came across and try to make them appear unbiased, informative, and objective? It was easier than trying to dig through 20 references and get a balanced point of view, even though this was exactly what responsible reporting would mean. It is important to note that many of these biases also work together. They feed on each other. The fear of being rebuked by those in power, say by asking questions that are too critical and getting banned from press meetings, worked synergistically with laziness and cheapness to encourage the press not to ask difficult questions. More and more the news media is in the business of collecting and printing the press releases from assorted powers. Investigative journalism is expensive, and it can anger the people being investigated. Of course, the most important people to investigate are those who are the most powerful, but they are also the people who the media is most afraid to anger. Editorial bias. People often talk about the bias a reporter might have, but editors and owners have an incredible amount of power. Did you know, for example, that the headlines of stories are almost always never written by the story author? They are written by the editors or headline writers. This is very significant because far more people read the headlines than the stories themselves. If the headline reads "Controversy over climate change" and the story actually describes a scientific community that all agrees that climate change is a serious issue and has man-made causes, what the majority of the people see is "controversy over climate change." Those who read the article are expecting to see that there is some controversy and so look for it. People who do research see lots of headlines that say controversy and so forth, even though the actual content and reporting doesn't show this. Many headlines do not accurately reflect what is contained within the reports themselves. What is more, the vast majority of people believe that the headlines are written by the authors of the people who do the writing, not the editors or others in the industry. The same is true for story titles and blurbs for online and television news. The bias of sensationalism. The media is competing for viewers. They want their news, therefore, to be as sensational as possible. Take the recent Ebola scare as an example. All the medical experts insisted that there was no real threat in the U.S., but CNN and many news stations had near continuous coverage talking about how to tell if you had Ebola symptoms and generally drumming up fear. When people are afraid, they watch the news to see what will happen next. More fear, more viewers. The news media will try to make news seem sensational and exciting, action-packed and extreme. This is done for the financial interest of garnering more viewers, but has the result of putting fictionalized or surreal spin on the news. When stories are blown out of proportion, people don't know how seriously to take the news. It is hard to have an informed public under such conditions. Trying to appear balanced can also be a type of bias. How? Because sometimes the consensus of experts is so far in one direction, even though very powerful interest or a portion of the population dissents. Two examples of this are global climate change and evolution. These two issues are not issues at all in the scientific literature. There's no discussion in peer-reviewed biology journals about whether or not evolution happens. The debate about evolution within those pages is related to questions about which of two species are more closely related, not whether they're related at all, or about the exact mechanism of evolutionary change in the case of a particular adaptation, but not about whether or not there are adaptations. My goal here isn't to try to convince people who disbelieve about evolution for reasons based on faith or whatever that evolution is true. It isn't even one about whether or not evolution is ultimately true. The issue is one about presentation in the media. There is, in fact, a clear scientific consensus, whether or not that scientific consensus is correct. But when the issue of evolution comes up in news programs, the media will hunt down dissenting opinion, usually from political think tanks. This dissenting opinion gives the impression that there is a real debate in the scientific community when there is not one. The same thing is true of global climate change. Surveying the papers for the last 20 years regarding global climate change, 97.1% of them agreed that it's human-caused. That is an incredible amount of agreement for something that's being researched. And keep in mind that among that dissenting less than 3%, that includes those that can't reach a conclusion. In fact, 2.2% simply said that it was unclear, so less than 1% of those actually deny a human cause of climate change. So now be honest. From watching the news and the way that they handle the subject, would you realize that that's the state of affairs when watching the experts discuss this? When the media hunts down dissenting opinions every time scientists discuss the view, it gives the misleading impression of a division in the scientific community that does not exist. Even if it turns out that scientists are entirely wrong about climate change, that is beside the point. The point is that the media is misrepresenting scientific opinion about climate change. And why does it do this with global climate change? When depression is discussed, for example, the media does not hunt down the small percentages of psychiatrists who believe that some psychotic behavior is caused by demonic possession. When there's a kidnapping, the media doesn't hunt down some experts who believe that disappearances are the results of alien abductions, even though these people exist likely in as large of numbers. There's no real financial interest in encouraging belief in possession or in alien abduction unless you're hawking books on the subject or a faith healer or some such. But there are huge financial interests for those who do not want to face the costly changes to their industries that battling climate change would require. As for evolution, though there are not the same sort of huge financial interests in terms of directly battling evolution in some sense, there is a huge amount of the population that is very upset by the notion, and the media can appeal to a wider audience by presenting it as if it is a very debated topic, and therefore gather in a larger audience and make more money in this way. The link at the bottom provides a source for the information regarding experts in climate change that I had quoted previously. Here's a clip from John Oliver's show in which he illustrates the bias of false balance. I'll pause so that you can play the video. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. We mentioned story selection already. One form of story selection is just dumbing down content for consumers. Take a look at this Jon Stewart story. I'll do a 5 count so that you can pause and hit play. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Here are 2 short clips from FAIR, Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. One is about recent midterm elections, among other things. The other deals with a form of bias called burying the lead, which is a form of sort of story selection, but hiding it in the back. We've talked about this in other terms, as well as how teachers and unions are portrayed. Again, I'll do a 5 count so that you can pause and hit play. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Here are 3 more very short clips from Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, analyzing the media's bias in covering Ebola, a message from the Nobel Peace Prize winner regarding drones, current military actions, and even bias in PBS. After watching these, do you think that FAIR's analysis is fair? Did you watch any of these programs originally that they are analyzing? And what is your considered view? Again, I will pause so that you can play the videos. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It is tempting to just keep adding and adding to this presentation because it's such an important subject and because there's so much to cover. But too much information at once can be counterproductive, so I'll end the presentation here. But please make sure that you read the chapter. The chapter also contains an excellent review of itself. Make sure you read all those bullet points. And also make sure that you look up important terms in the glossary. Until next time.